Hey guys, tonight we slide into the patched up boots of a medieval peasant, waking to a world of smoke, grit, and the kind of stubborn hope that outlasts the cold. Picture a dawn where the air's thick with hearth fire and damp straw, where a goat's bleat breaks the quiet before your eyes do. You're in a village so tiny it's a speck history forgot, where the forest edges close, like a nosy neighbor who never blinks. This isn't the stuff of ballads or shining swords. It's the rough, overlooked corner where every day's a scrap with hunger, frost, and lords who wouldn't know your face. Heads up, survival's not guaranteed here, but let's see how you'd manage. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Share your city and local time in the comments. We always love seeing who's settling in with us, whether you're in Reykjavik as the northern lights begin to glow, or in Buenos Aires as the evening breeze rolls in. Now soften the lights, maybe light a candle, or let some music play low, and let's ease into this quiet night together. You wake to the faint bleat of a goat outside, its call tangling with the creak of your hut's warped door. Your village has no name, or none you've heard, just a knot of homes crouched in a dip of land, hidden from roads and royal maps. The fields around you are stubborn patches, half green, half mud, worked until your knuckles crack. The forest hems you in, its trees tall and grim, like sentries who don't take kindly to visitors. You avoid it unless you're out of firewood or desperate. The forest isn't a storybook. It's where tracks vanish and bones stay. Your life's scope is short, 40 paces from your door to the field. No more. You were born here, and unless a comet falls or a saint calls your name, you'll die here too. Historians note most medieval peasants rarely strayed beyond a few miles, their world ending where the hills did. Your huts waddle and daub, a mix of mud, straw, and prayers, barely holding back the damp. The thatch roof sags, shedding straw like a sick dog sheds fur, and leaks in spots you've given up fixing. It smells of soot, livestock, and the kind of damp that settles in your bones. You're used to it, like you're used to the sting in your shoulders by noon. Here's a quirky twist. Some villagers believe a crow landing on your roof means bad luck unless you toss it a crumb. You roll your eyes, but you still flick bread at that bird by your chimney. Historians still argue whether these rituals were folklore or a way to ration scarce food. Either way, you don't mess with crows. Your days begin with dawn, end at dusk, and are filled with work in between. The village has maybe 15 families, enough for a lively saint's day, but too small to hide a secret. Everyone knows whose pig rooted up the turnips, whose kid tripped the elder's dog, but you let it slide unless it's serious. Peace keeps the pot full. The elder, Wat, isn't a chief, just a man whose fence hasn't fallen and whose cow gives milk. He met a peddler once and milks that tale like it's a title. You don't challenge him. It's not worth the fuss. Arguments fizzle with a shared onion or a quick nod, because anger doesn't plow a field. There's no market, no alehouse, just furrows and a track that's more puddle than path. A stranger's arrival sparks whispers. Are they lost? Hexed? You jest to your neighbor, they're here for Wat's cow, and she laughs, nearly dropping her bucket. This rhythm is your anchor. You know which stone hides the best kindling, who'll swap a rake for a leak, how the clouds shift before rain. It's not pretty, but it's yours. You don't dream of thrones or tournaments. You dream of a roof that holds and a stew that lasts. When a distant bell tolls, soft as a sigh. You pause, wipe soot from your hands, and feel a quiet strength. Not comfort, but the stubborn pulse of carrying on in a world that doesn't notice. Your house isn't much. It's not symmetrical. It's not insulated. It's not, strictly speaking, waterproof. But it's yours, sort of. More precisely, it's the Lord's, and you borrow it in exchange for a lifetime of labor and obedience. Still, you built it, or helped your father build it, and every crooked timber, every sagging rafter, every floor dip and drafty wall tells a story written in calluses and mud. The frame is made from nearby trees, not the tall, majestic kind you imagine in fairy tales. These are short, stubborn things, bent by wind and age, and cut down with a borrowed axe so dull it might as well have been a butter knife. The beams warp. The corners don't quite meet, but that's okay. Neither do your knees on rainy mornings. To fill the walls, you use wattle and daub, a mix of woven sticks smeared with a paste of mud, straw, and occasionally manure. Yes, it smells. No, you don't notice anymore. Historians still argue whether this building method was more economical or just what you had on hand. Either way, it works, mostly. You slap the daub on with your hands, smooth it into cracks, press it into the gaps between sticks. Over time, it dries, crumbles, gets patched, and crumbles again. There's always a new hole by winter, always a breeze where there wasn't one yesterday. The roof is thatched, golden straw when fresh, gray, and home to sparrows after a season. Birds steal bits for their nests. Rain steals the rest. You've placed buckets beneath the worst leaks, and when the buckets fill, you just scoot them over and place another. One day, you'll fix the ridge properly, but not today. Probably not tomorrow. The floor is dirt. You tell yourself it's packed earth, but really, it's just mud in a committed relationship. You sweep it. You scatter rushes. You step carefully in spring when it's soft, and again in winter when it cracks. It shifts. It heaves. It absorbs. Some days it feels like the house itself is exhaling. Windows. That's generous. You have openings. Shutters carved from rough wood that swing outward and never close quite right. Glass is a luxury you've never seen, let alone touched. The wind comes in. The smoke goes out eventually. If not, you cough and mutter about bad luck and blame the chimney hole for not doing its one job. Your door is a single plank of uneven wood, hung with a bit of leather for a hinge. It creaks. It always has. You don't lock it, not because you trust everyone, but because what would they steal? The stew's already been skimmed twice, and the only thing of value in the house is the stool that doesn't wobble, and even that depends on the weather. Inside, space is shared. One room, maybe a loft for the kids. The hearth sits in the center, built of stone if you're lucky, clay if you're not. The smoke curls up toward a hole in the roof. On still nights, it lingers like a bored ghost. On windy nights, it leaves entirely and takes some of the heat with it. You sleep in the same space you cook, eat, mend, argue, and occasionally weep silently when you think no one is listening. You share this room with your parent, siblings, maybe a grandparent, maybe a neighbor's orphaned child, and definitely some animals. The goat gets a corner. The chickens sleep in a basket. The dog, he chooses, usually somewhere warm. There's no privacy. The idea of sleeping alone is more punishment than privilege. You've grown used to elbows in the night, to your sister's foot creeping over your straw mattress, to the baby muttering nonsense in its sleep. The sounds of breathing are comforting. You listen to the rhythm like a lullaby composed by exhaustion. Your furniture is minimal: a table, a bench, maybe a chest. If your uncle was clever with wood, there's a stool that doesn't tip. You eat off your lap. You mend by the fire. You tuck your precious things: thread, salt, a scrap of ribbon, into cracks in the wall and pretend they're safe. In the rafters, things hang: garlic, onions, herbs, dried fish if you're lucky. You can smell the difference between seasons just by standing on tiptoe and sniffing the air above your head. In late spring, there's the scent of sprouting. In early winter, it's the anxious dryness of too little stored. Here's a quirky fact. Some villagers believe hanging rosemary and sage above the hearth keeps illness out. Others swear by a string of eggshells or a coin nailed into the door frame. Do they work? Maybe, maybe not. But in a world where even stew can betray you, you take your protection wherever you can hang it. You know the house isn't strong. You know the walls buckle and the roof sags, but it's yours. You know where the cold sneaks in and how to plug it with a sack. You know which beam groans when stepped on. You know where the afternoon light falls through the slats in a soft golden stripe across the dirt. And when outsiders pass through, and they sometimes do, you catch the way they wrinkle their nose. They see poverty, but you see effort. You see repairs made in the dark, by hand, with fingers that still ache. You see the place that shelters you from the worst of the wind, that catches heat like a tired glove that hasn't collapsed. Yet, the house may not last forever, but it's gotten you through storms, through births and fevers, through quiet nights and louder ones, and each creak, each crack, each patch and wobble reminds you you're still here. You made it through another season. That roof may leak, but it's still up there. And you're still under it. Your day begins and ends with stew. It is not a dish. It is a condition of life. You don't make stew. You maintain it, like a garden or a grudge. The pot rarely goes cold. It just simmers endlessly over the fire, absorbing whatever you've got and forgetting nothing. Every spoonful tastes like yesterday and possibly last month. They call it pottage, though you just call it dinner. And breakfast, sometimes lunch, if there's any left. The ingredients depend on what hasn't rotted, what grew this year, and what the goat didn't trample. On a good day, it's cabbage, barley, a handful of peas, maybe an onion if you're living luxuriously. On a bad day, it's water, some leafy regrets, and hope. The stew is never new. It is never old. It just is. You add to it. You skim from it. You give it a stir and mutter something vaguely religious. It lives in the hearth like a family member, albeit one with no manners and suspicious texture. The pot itself tells a story. It's cast iron, soot blackened, and older than most people in your household. It hasn't been fully cleaned since your grandmother's wedding. You wipe it down. You scrape the sides. You accept that it is seasoned not by spice, but by years. Historians still argue whether medieval pottage was ever actually tasty. The answer seems to depend on whether you were hungry enough to imagine flavor. Sometimes a scrap of salted pork slips in, and the pot remembers joy for a moment. More often, it's just a bit of bone, boiled until it forgets it was once meat. Bread. Now there's your other constant. Not fluffy, not soft, more like edible masonry. It's dark, dense, and made of rye or barley. Because wheat is for lords and legends. It doesn't rise. It doesn't flake. It doesn't care about your feelings. but it fills your stomach and gives your stew something to cling to. You slice it with effort, you chew it with commitment. Leave it out overnight and you could use it as a tool or a weapon. Still, there's a weird kind of affection in the way your jaw aches. It's a chew that says, "You survived today." Sometimes when flour is scarce, you get famine bread. That's when bark gets involved. Yes, tree bark. Inner bark, scraped, dried, and ground with whatever is left at the bottom of the miller's sack. Bitter, splintery, technically edible, and still, you give thanks for it, because if your bread cracks a tooth, it means you have bread. On rare days, there's a third option. Trenchers. Stale bread used as plates. They soak up the stew. You either eat them at the end or pass them to the dog. Unless you are the dog in the village's social pecking order, then you get the trencher and pretend it's a compliment. Meat is a rumor. You have chickens, but they lay eggs. Killing one is serious business. Cows give milk. You don't eat your cow unless things are going very, very wrong. If you do eat meat, you eat all of it. Nose to tail, bones for broth, blood for pudding, fat for rendering. Waste is not an option. Here's a fringe detail. Some people believe that soup tastes better if you whisper a prayer into it first. Not a loud one, just a quiet, half-muttered plea to the saints of seasoning. No one knows if it works, but you do it anyway. Because talking to your food is only strange if your food ever talks back. Fish might show up, but rivers are controlled by your Lord. Fishing without permission, that's theft. And your Lord's steward is very enthusiastic about fines. So when you do fish, it's quiet, it's discreet, and it's definitely not discussed out loud. Dairy is common but unstable. Milk turns. Butter goes rancid. Cheese molds. You cut around the blue parts and pretend it was meant to be like that. If the cow's been generous, you have hard, sour cheese stored in a wrapped cloth in the rafters. If she hasn't, you lie about how good the stew tastes. You drink ale because water is not your friend. Wells are shallow. Streams are suspect. So you make weak ale, small beer, barely alcoholic, brewed at home, drunk by everyone from toddlers to grandparents. It's safer than water, less dull than nothing, and doesn't judge you when you drink it with breakfast. If you have apples, you might make cider, pears if you're lucky, wine for monks and nobles, mead, a fairy tale. Your dreams are made of barley and boiled things, and they're mostly beige. Vegetables carry your nutrition, such as it is. Cabbage, leeks, garlic, turnips, carrots, though they're white or purple, not orange. The orange ones haven't been invented yet. You'll have to wait a few centuries for that glamorous glow-up. Herbs grow by the door. Parsley, dill, sage, mint. You use them more for medicine than flavor. A sprig in a pot, a leaf under a tongue, a poultice if someone's swelling. Sometimes they help, sometimes they don't, but they always feel like doing something, which is more than nothing. There are feast days, weddings, saints' days, the occasional harvest festival when even the Lord forgets to be stingy. You roast a bird, maybe a pie, not buttery, flaky delight, more like a meat vault. The crust is hard, the filling is optimistic, but it's warm, it's shared, it's real. Most days, though, you scrape the pot, you dunk the bread, you drink the ale, you sigh, and you lean back, full enough to face another night. Not satisfied, but not starving. You've eaten worse. You'll eat worse again. And as the wind hums through the wall cracks and the dog thumps his tail against your bench, you rest your hands on your stomach and think, the stew didn't kill you today. That's a win. Maybe tomorrow it'll taste a little like garlic. The man who owns your house doesn't know your name. He doesn't need to. He owns the land, and by extension, everything on it. Your roof, your goat, your barley, and technically, a portion of your dignity. You are what's known as a villain. Not a villain, though the spelling's close enough to sting. It means you're bound to the land, tied by law and custom and the invisible weight of history. You can't leave without permission. You can't sell your plot. You can't even pass it down to your children without paying a fee. You're not a slave. At least that's what they tell you. But freedom isn't exactly in your vocabulary either. The Lord lives up the hill. His house is made of better wood, straighter beams, and thick thatch that doesn't leak. He might even have glass in the windows. He eats meat more than once a week. He wears wool lined with fur, while you wear whatever hasn't been patched beyond recognition. You don't speak to him. That's what the steward is for. A man with a sharp look, ink-stained fingers, and a voice like dry bread. He comes around with his ledger, a wax tablet or a bit of parchment, and a list of things you owe: grain, eggs, chickens, wool, ale. If you own it, he owns a portion of it. Corvée labor. That's what they call the days you spend working his fields instead of your own. No payment, no thanks. Just the expectation that somewhere, someone in the manor gets a second helping because you didn't. You owe taxes too, some visible, some not. A portion of your grain, a share of your wool. If you brew ale, he wants some. If you catch a fish, he'll ask if it was from his river. Even if your net caught it, the water it swam in technically had an owner. There's a mill you're required to use. It's the only one around, and it belongs to, you guessed it, the Lord. You grind your grain there, and you pay for the privilege. Thinking of grinding it at home. Illegal. Seriously. People have been fined for using a hand mill because if the Lord isn't profiting, you must be cheating. There's a communal oven. Same story. You bake, you pay. If the steward finds out you've been roasting things at home, there's trouble. And trouble, in this case, has less to do with justice and more to do with revenue loss. Want to get married? There's a fee. Want to inherit your father's hut? Fee. Move to another village? Ask permission. And yes, pay a fee. Historians still debate whether these fees were consistently enforced or mostly ceremonial. From where you're standing, holding a chicken you're about to part with, they feel very real. Even your livestock can be taxed. Your tools, your ability to breed pigs, your right to cut wood in the forest. All of it exists inside a web of permissions, fees, expectations, and unspoken or else's, and yet the system works. Not because it's fair, not because it's kind, but because it's stable. You know the rules, you know what's expected. You can hate it, grumble about it, shake your fist at the steward's retreating back, but at least there's no surprise. You give, give, give. And sometimes the Lord gives something back. A feast day, a holiday where labor is waived, a kind word possibly from horseback. It's not enough to balance the scales, but it's enough to keep them from tipping over completely. Your Lord might be generous or petty, old or young, devout or drunk. It barely matters. The structure endures regardless. Your reverence is less for the man and more for the title. You bow when he passes. You remove your cap. You use the right words, not because you believe he deserves them, but because trouble is expensive and you've got a fence to fix. Still, part of you wonders, would he notice if you were gone? If your hut collapsed or your goat died, if you missed a day in his fields, probably not, but missed too many, and the steward comes knocking, not angrily, just patiently, with numbers and questions you don't want to answer. You learn over time how to understate your harvest, how to misplace an egg, how to pay in favors instead of grain. You trade quiet cooperation for mercy. It's not rebellion, it's negotiation peasant style. Here's a quirky truth. Some peasants would hide an extra sack of rye underground, just in case. Not for greed, for survival, for that winter when everything went wrong, for that season when the Lord took more than usual. It's not theft, it's insurance medieval edition. The Lord, for all his authority, is distant, a symbol more than a presence. A man who lives in stone, eats from silver, and probably doesn't know how to dig a furrow or birth a goat. You don't hate him exactly. You just don't expect him to understand. Sometimes you hope. You pray louder. You offer more. Maybe one day you'll be noticed, lifted, rewarded, even a little. Most likely you won't. But hope, like stew, is cheap to keep on the fire. And so, year after year, season after season, you pay what's due. In barley, in sweat, in silence. Because the system wasn't built for you to rise. It was built for you to continue. And somehow, you do. You don't own a calendar. The idea of numbered days and named months feels aristocratic. What you have instead is a rhythm carved by saints and feast days, by bells from a neighboring chapel and the shifting scent of the air. You measure time in turnips, in the way the sun creeps differently across your floor, in the moments when the stew goes from thin to concerning. The church, though, it owns time. Your year is not divided into 12 months, but into sacred slices. Lent, Advent, Michaelmas, All Saints, Ascension. You don't say April. You say after Easter. You don't plan for September. You prepare for just before St. Remigius. The saints mark the path through your year like breadcrumbs through a dark forest. The priest in your village, if you have one, is the only literate man for miles. He is equal parts confessor, counselor, calendar, and community news bulletin. He tells you when to sow, when to reap, when to fast, and when to feast. You bring him eggs, and in return he forgives your sins, or tells you to pray harder, or mumbles something in Latin and walks away like the divine is too busy for specifics. Latin is the church's language, and it might as well be magic. You don't understand a word of it, but it hums through the stone walls on holy days, echoing in the rafters, mingling with incense and wood smoke. You cross yourself when everyone else does. You kneel when they kneel. You mouth along and pretend it means something, because it has to. Right? The church tells you what you can eat and when. On Fridays, no meat. On Lenten fast days, you pivot to fish or go without. If you live nowhere near water, creativity takes over. Here's a fringe favorite. In one region, they decided beaver tails counted as fish. Because they're scaly, or because someone really missed meat. Historians still argue whether this was desperation or divine loophole engineering. You fast for 40 days before Easter. You feast for a day after, if the barley's held out. The balance never feels quite fair, but it's holy, so you accept it. You don't complain, at least not loudly. Tithing is sacred. 1/10 of your yield, grain, wool, cider, eggs, goes to the church. You bring it with bowed head and open hands. It's not optional. You don't tithe. Your soul might suffer, or at least your social life will. The priest remembers. He always remembers. The tithe barn stands taller than your house. smug and dry, while your hut wheezes through another rainy week. You hand over your best barley, and the priest nods, then prays for mercy on your behalf. You try not to notice that his shoes are newer than yours, and yet the church gives, in its own way. It gives structure. When your cow dies, the priest tells you which saint to pray to. When your child is ill, he explains that it's a test or a punishment, or maybe the devil is slipping in through your window at night. You nod solemnly. What else can you do? Sometimes he gives you a relic, a splinter of bone, a tooth wrapped in ribbon, a finger from some forgotten martyr. You tuck it under your child's pillow. You stir the stew with it once, just in case. When things improve, you tell yourself it worked. When they don't, you whisper harder. You believe because you have to, and when you can't believe, you pretend. Because the church teaches that your suffering has meaning, that your endurance is holy, that heaven waits for the meek, though it's never quite clear how long the wait will be. There are saints for everything. Saint Apollonia for teeth, Saint Isidore for plowing, Saint Sebastian for plague. You whisper their names while walking the field. You promise small things, bread, fasting, silence, in exchange for protection. Sometimes they answer, or seem to, and that's enough to ask again. You light candles, not because it helps, but because it feels like trying. Sometimes your prayers are long. Sometimes they're just a glance toward the sky while you mend a fence or stir a pot. The divine isn't picky, or so you hope. Your holy days are your holidays, not the palm tree kind, the kind where labor pauses, bread is shared, and someone plays a flute badly enough to be called festive. Children chase chickens, old men tell stories, and for one breath, you're not just surviving, you're celebrating surviving. There's a comfort in the rhythm, a soft predictability in the bells, the incense, the rituals that don't ask you to understand, only to show up. Your soul is stitched into the church like a patch on your tunic, frayed at the edges, but still holding. Here's a quirky tradition. During rogation days, you walk the boundary of the village with the priest, chanting prayers to bless the land. You smack bushes with sticks. You sing. You trudge through mud and cold because holy ground doesn't bless itself. You don't understand the theology. You don't know what a sacrament is, but you've received it. You don't know what purgatory looks like, but you've been warned. And when someone dies, you light a candle, pay a little more, and hope their name is said enough times to matter. And you kneel. Always, you kneel. Not because it feels good on your knees, not because you understand, but because the church gives your suffering a shape. Without it, life would feel like mud, everywhere, unavoidable, and impossible to grip. The church turns that mud into ritual, into meaning. So you fast, you feast, you pray, you tithe, you give and give and give. And sometimes when the bells ring just right, you feel like something beyond you is listening, or pretending to. Either way, it's enough. You know when someone's sick, it's not subtle. The cough shift, deeper, wetter, slower. The face goes pale in a way the cold alone can't explain. A fever creeps in and refuses to leave. Sometimes it's a chill that doesn't lift even by the fire. Sometimes it's just a feeling in your bones. Someone's not going to make it through the next full moon. There are no doctors here, not the kind with tools and titles. If you're lucky, your village has a wise woman, someone who knows which herbs to burn, which ones to boil, and which ones not to touch unless you want visions of Saint Cuthbert at the foot of your bed. She's not certified, but she's saved more lives than the Lord ever has. She'll make a poultice of crushed garlic, a tea from nettles, a salve that smells like boiled disappointment. She doesn't promise healing, just effort, and sometimes that's enough. Other times you send for the monk. He reads, he writes, he prays over you in Latin and presses his fingers to your forehead, like he can feel your sins fighting back. He brings a tincture in a glass vial and instructions to trust in God. You drink it. It's bitter. It doesn't help, but you thank him anyway. Sickness isn't a surprise. It's a feature of life. It comes and goes like the weather, sudden, unpredictable, occasionally loud. Infection from a small cut, fever after a damp night, swelling from a bite that never quite stops aching. You accept it like you accept the wind through your roof. Annoying, dangerous, and probably your fault. People don't talk about germs. That word hasn't been invented. Microscopes are centuries away. What you have instead are theories, and they are creative. Some blame miasma, bad air. If a place smells foul, it's assumed to be dangerous, which, to be fair, is sometimes true. Rotting meat and standing water rarely mean good things. To protect yourself, you tie herbs into your sleeves, stuff lavender in your collar, or walk around with a vinegar-soaked rag tucked under your nose like you're attending a festival for the mildly panicked. Others say it's sin. Illness is punishment. Yours, your neighbor's, or possibly your goat's. Maybe you thought something impure. Maybe you didn't go to Mass with enough conviction. Maybe the saints are bored and decided to test you. The logic is loose, but the fear is solid. Still others believe in the evil eye, a glare, a curse, a whispered grudge behind a fence. If your child falls ill after a neighbor frowns in your direction, it's probably not coincidence. You hang garlic. You whisper prayers. You avoid eye contact. Here's a fringe remedy. Tie a live chicken to the infected area and wait for the illness to transfer. If the chicken dies, it worked. If it doesn't, you have a very annoyed bird and a slightly worse infection. Historians still debate whether this was based on symbolism, desperation, or medieval poultry-related optimism. If you have a fever, you might be bled. A man with a knife, more confident than qualified, arrives and assures you that too much blood is your problem. He cuts. You feel weaker. He nods, pleased. Sometimes he brings leeches, which are less dramatic but equally unsettling. They latch. They suck. You're told it's good for you. You're not convinced. You hear about the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. No one has seen them, but they are apparently responsible for everything from indigestion to heartbreak. You try to balance them through diet, through bleeding, through prayer. It rarely works, but it gives illness a reason, and reasons are comforting. For swelling, there are plasters and poultices, mashed herbs wrapped in cloth, mud with ashes, warm bread pressed against the skin like a bandage of carbs, and hope. Some work, some don't. A few burn, but at least you're doing something. If your stomach aches, you chew charcoal. If you cough blood, you mix wine with powdered pearls, because clearly wealth equals healing. If your eyes blur, someone blows smoke over your head and mumbles something about moon phases. You sit very still and try not to sneeze. There's no quarantine. You don't isolate. You keep working until you can't. The fields need tending. The goat doesn't care that you're coughing up bits of your soul. When you collapse, Someone puts a blanket over you and hopes you either get better or do it quietly. You lie in bed, if you have one. More often, it's just a corner by the hearth. You sweat, you mutter. Someone brings you broth, or water, or a bit of stew that tastes like last week. You don't complain. Complaining wastes breath. And then, sometimes, you recover. Slowly, stiffly, like the world is stitched back together but crooked. You walk again, limping. You cough less. You smile once, and someone notices. And that's when they start believing you'll make it. Other times, you don't. Death doesn't knock. It sighs. It leans in. It settles. Breathing slows. Skin cools. Eyes turn distant. Someone lights a candle. Someone else starts muttering prayers. The room gets very quiet, even with 10 people and a goat in it. And you, if you're the one watching, you stay silent. Not because you're not afraid, but because you've seen this before. Illness isn't drama, it's routine. It's the cough that lingers, the limp that never leaves, the swollen finger that ends up costing you your hand. It's the memory of your brother who died from a fever after rain, your cousin who got bit and never stopped shaking. The Black Death hasn't come yet, but the warm-up acts are doing just fine. And even when people recover, they don't come back the same. Their faces look older, their eyes don't shine. They walk slower, talk less, thank the saints more. They get quiet around the fire, like they've seen something they're not supposed to talk about. And you go back to work, because someone has to milk the goat. Someone has to stir the stew. Someone has to survive. It starts with a cough. Not new, not surprising. Coughs are as common as cracked hands and cold mornings, but this one spreads, quicker, deeper, like the village caught a chill it can't shake off. First one household, then another. Then the chapel bell rings too many times in 1 week, and no one has to say it out loud. Something is wrong. The Black Death is coming, though it doesn't call itself that yet. To you, it's just the sickness. A worse one, a faster one, a meaner one. It arrives in whispers. A traveler from the next village says they buried 5 people yesterday. Another says the baker dropped in the middle of kneading dough. You listen, you nod, you cross yourself, and then you go back to stirring the stew, checking on the goat, pretending the air doesn't feel heavier. You've lived with sickness all your life. It's like a cousin who overstays their welcome. But this is a wolf. And it's not howling, it's already at the door. People say it spreads by breath, by sin, by rats, by saints angry with how you tithed last winter. Historians still argue whether the plague's primary vector was fleas, bad air, or contaminated grain. You're not a historian. You're a peasant with a leaky roof and no time for theories. One day, someone coughs blood. The next, they can't walk. By sundown, they're gone. And by sunrise, so is their sister. Boils appear in armpits, in groins, on necks. Buboes, angry purple swellings that ache like curses. Some burst, some don't. All of them scare the life out of everyone, even the chickens. You don't need a priest to tell you it's serious. You can see it in the way people stop arguing about who borrowed whose shears. The village grows quieter. No laughter from the lane. No gossip by the well. Just coughing, prayers, and the occasional creak of a cart carrying someone not moving anymore. Some families seal their doors. Others try to flee. You think about it, just for a moment. But where would you go? The next village, they're just as sick. The forest, it's hungry. The city, that's where it's worse. And besides, travel is dangerous even when you're not potentially carrying a death sentence in your breath. You stay. Because your fence still needs mending. Because your niece has a fever. Because leaving won't stop what's already in the air. People get desperate. Some tie plague amulets around their necks. Bits of bone, blessed metal, scraps of parchment with prayers written by monks too afraid to leave the scriptorium. Others burn herbs in the corners of their homes. Someone buries onions in all four corners of the garden. Another insists boiling vinegar will keep the devil out. A few flagellants pass through, shirtless, bleeding, chanting. They believe pain will earn mercy. The kids are terrified. The goats are unimpressed. The priest stops visiting. That's how you know it's truly bad. He's always been the one to offer last rites, to bless the dying, to collect tithes with one hand and hand out forgiveness with the other. Now his house is shuttered. He doesn't come to Mass. Rumor says he's sick, or scared, or both. You light a candle. You whisper names, you wipe sweat from your child's brow, and pretend not to see the shadow in their eyes. If the plague takes you, it takes you fast. Fever, delirium, then stillness. If it spares you, it leaves you different, thin, brittle, like you've been hollowed out and only half filled back up. Burials change. There's no time for ritual. The bell doesn't ring as often, not because people aren't dying, but because there's no one left strong enough to pull the rope. Graves are shallower, coffins are rare. Sometimes they bury two at once, sometimes more. Some villagers turn to blame. They whisper about a woman with strange herbs, about a traveler who smelled of salt and never blinked, about people who prayed the wrong way. It's not fair, but fear rarely is. You see things you can't explain. A man laughing too loudly in an empty field. A child speaking to no one. A dog that howls every time the wind shifts. You stop asking questions. You just keep the fire going. Keep the door latched. Keep the stew warm, just in case someone is well enough to eat. You survive, maybe, not because you're strong, not because you're pure, but because the dice rolled your way this time. And when you finally step outside after the last cough fades, you find the village smaller, quieter, and older somehow. You sweep the ashes from the hearth, you fetch water, you check on the goat. The world hasn't ended, it's just rearranged itself. Less gently this time. The plague doesn't leave all at once. It fades. It lingers. Like smoke from a fire you didn't start and can't quite put out. Some days you wake coughing and wonder. Some nights you dream of purple boils and Latin chants. But you live. And in a world like this, that's not nothing. You don't sleep like people in books. You don't lie down, close your eyes, and drift into a neat 8 hours. Sleep comes in 2 acts like a poorly rehearsed village play. First sleep, a midnight wake, then second sleep. It's not strange. It's normal, expected. You've never known any other rhythm. The fire dims as the last spoonfuls of stew dry at the edge of the pot. The goats are curled in the corner, chickens quiet in their basket. You lie down next to your family, elbows bumping, knees overlapping, someone always snoring. You're all packed in like rushes on the floor, not elegant, but warm. And warmth is worth more than privacy. No one undresses. You sleep in your clothes, sometimes in your boots. The cold creeps in too easily to play around with bare skin. You layer wool, cloaks, whatever feels less damp that night. The wind whistles through the shutters. You pretend it's singing, or at least not cursing. Your bed, a mattress if you're lucky. stuffed with straw, or feathers, or the flattened dreams of previous generations. More often, it's just woven rushes laid directly on dirt. After a while, you forget what comfort is supposed to feel like. Your spine just learns to make peace with uneven ground. Sleep comes slow. Your thoughts tumble about the fence you still haven't fixed, the stew that's too thin, the cough that sounds worse. But eventually, your body gives in. First sleep begins. It's shallow, but real. The kind that lets your muscles soften, your mind drift, your breathing match the sound of the coals. And then, just as naturally, you wake. Middle of the night, maybe an hour, maybe two. No alarm, just your body knowing it's time. You sit up, adjust the cloak around your shoulders, and listen. Someone else is awake too. Your sister muttering a prayer, your father poking the fire, a dog thumping its tail in its sleep. This waking period is quiet, software dreamlike. You don't light a candle, too precious. You don't talk much. Maybe you pray. Maybe you think. Maybe you step outside and breathe the icy air, watching your breath fog like a ghost trying to escape. Some say this time between sleeps is sacred, that the veil is thinner, that dreams from the first sleep linger like visitors. You've heard stories about visions, about ancestors, about saints whispering secrets during these hours. You've never seen a saint, but once you dreamt of a barley field ripening in winter. You still think about that. Here's a quirky belief. Some say sleeping with your feet pointed toward the door invites death. You always curl toward the fire instead, just in case. The church doesn't preach it, but the old women swear by it. And the old women are usually right. Second sleep is heavier, deeper. It drags you under. This is when the real rest happens. Your joints stop aching. Your breathing deepens. If you dream now, it's harder to remember, less symbolic, more fragmented. Once you dreamt you were boiling stew and the pot whispered your name. You woke hungry and mildly unnerved. Sometimes sleep is interrupted by coughing, by cold, by a goat stepping on your foot with no remorse. You adjust. You roll over. You mutter something unkind and then go back under. Outside, the world shrinks. No candles unless it's an emergency. Wax is for the priest. You have a tallow lamp, maybe. It smells like old meat and barely flickers. Most nights, the coals glow softly and the rest is shadows. The night isn't peaceful. It's dense, a kind of silence that crackles. You hear every sound. Mice in the wall, wind in the thatch, the soft shuffle of someone turning over, and sometimes sounds that don't belong. A howl, a creak, a whisper that might have been your own breath or something else. You don't talk about the night sounds, but you prepare for them. Iron tools by the door, a sprig of rue hung above the hearth, a string around your child's wrist. These aren't superstitions, they're traditions, and you don't test them. Wolves are real. In some regions, they come close enough to make the hair on your neck stand. They're not metaphors, they're teeth and hunger. You've seen tracks, you've heard the howls. Once, a neighbor lost a pig, nothing left but hoofprints and dread. There are other things too, ghosts, spirits, witches. You don't speak of them, but you act like they're real because your grandmother did, and her grandmother, and none of them vanished in the night. That you know of. Your dreams matter, even if they don't make sense. A dream of wheat, prosperity, a dream of losing teeth, death, a snake, illness. You don't dream every night, but when you do, you share it in the morning like a weather report. The wise woman down the lane reads dreams better than she reads faces. If she frowns after yours, You sleep with garlic under your pillow the next night. You don't have a bedtime routine. You don't sip tea or journal. You collapse and wake and collapse again. Sleep isn't a ritual. It's a negotiation with darkness. And yet, there's a comfort in it. The shared warmth, the sound of breathing, the faint hope that your dream will be sweet, or at least boring. The awareness that everyone in the room is alive and snoring. You've never known any other kind of sleep, and honestly, you don't want to. You don't leave the village, not because you're lazy, not because you're afraid, but because, quite frankly, you're not allowed, at least not without permission, paperwork, and a very good reason. And you don't have time for bureaucracy when your fence is falling apart and the goat is eating your only pair of socks again. Your entire world stretches about 5 miles in any direction, maybe 10 if you're unusually adventurous or lost. That's it. Beyond that, the world blurs into rumor, wild woods, and cities that sound more like fairy tales than real places. You know about Paris, you've heard of Rome, but you've also heard that Rome is crawling with sinners, and Paris smells like boiled sin and wet bread. You know the names of 5 villages. One of them once had a goose that could count to 3. Another is full of people who pronounce barley wrong. These are your international relations. Once a year, if you're lucky, the peddler arrives. He smells like nutmeg, horse sweat, and mystery. He brings needles, ribbons, rumors, and dried apples. He's your news source, fashion icon, and window to the wider world, all wrapped in a dented hat and a crooked grin. He tells you the king is sick. He tells you the queen has a dog that drinks wine. He tells you there's a land where the rivers run backwards. You believe half of it. Travel is a luxury reserved for pilgrims, nobles, and criminals. You don't fall into any of those categories. If you leave without permission from your lord, you're not just wandering. You're breaking the law. You're a fugitive, a runaway, a serf with ideas above your station. Historians still debate just how locked down the average peasant was, but for you, the message is clear. Stay put, because if you don't, someone will notice. And not in the good way. There are road tolls, bandits, and laws you've never heard of waiting to make your life harder the minute you step beyond the hedgerow. Plus, you don't read. So if a sign says danger, quicksand, and wolves, you're just as likely to use it for firewood and keep walking. Still, sometimes you think about it, just a little. When the clouds roll in low, when the stew tastes especially gray, when the well water is too quiet, you wonder what it would be like to see the ocean, or a castle, or a town with more than one bell. Your cousin left once, years ago, went to the city to find work, came back with thinner arms and thicker silence, said nothing, smiled weird, wouldn't touch the stew. You never asked again. The road is not yours. It belongs to merchants, messengers, and monks with sandals tougher than your roof. You watch them pass sometimes. From behind a tree, they walk like the world owes them space, like wolves won't bother them, like they know where they're going. You don't. And if you did, you still wouldn't go alone. You dream sometimes of walking until the trees change shape, until the fields aren't barley anymore, until the air smells like other people's ideas. But then you wake up and your foot is numb, and someone is already shouting that the goat's in the grain again. Your place is here, not in a sad, resigned way, but in a practical, boots-on-dirt way. This is where your tools are, where the sun hits the fence just right in the afternoon, where you know which tree gives the best apples and which one drops branches without warning. You know this place like you know your own hands, cracked, calloused, and quietly reliable. You don't need maps. Your village is your compass, the forest edge, the chapel, the stream with the flat rock shaped like a crooked smile. These are your north, south, east, and west. And yet, when the peddler mentions a market 3 valleys over, something flickers in you. Not quite longing, not quite jealousy, just a twitch, like your feet briefly forget they're supposed to stay planted. The next day, you shake it off. You fix the fence, you stir the stew, you count the chickens. You don't leave because the world out there isn't made for you. It's too fast, too sharp, too full of people who look at your clothes and see a story they don't want to read. You're not afraid of the world. You're just deeply aware that it doesn't care whether you make it home. And besides, if you left, who would feed the goat? You don't write your name, not because you forgot it, but because no one ever taught you how. Letters are strange things. Tiny soldiers on parchment, marching in rows, carrying secrets you're not meant to understand. You've seen them on signs, on scrolls, on the priest's lips when he chants Latin like it's a spell, and you're just a pair of ears in the pews. But reading, writing, that's for priests, scribes, and people who can afford to have thoughts permanently recorded. Your alphabet consists of symbols carved into wood, patterns stitched into cloth, and stories passed from one crack-toothed mouth to another. You remember things through rhythm, through rhyme, through repetition. That's why folk tales all have rules of 3 and why prayers always rhyme, because memory is your only bookshelf. Your neighbor says she once saw a man read aloud from a scroll without looking terrified. He wore gloves, had neat hair, smelled like oil and beeswax. He was a clerk, sent by the abbey. She remembers the way he flicked his finger under the words like they were obedient dogs. You tried once, picked up a bit of discarded parchment, made shapes in the dirt, circles, lines, a bird. Then your brother laughed and said it looked like the chicken had learned Latin. You kicked the dirt and went back to weeding. Still, there's power in writing. You can feel it. A lord's signature can steal your land. A bishop's letter can summon you to penance. A scroll can outlive you. And you're made of stronger stuff than scrolls. You sign with an inks. When someone needs proof that you witnessed something, they point, you nod, and you scratch that jagged cross like it's your soul in shorthand. School, there's none. Maybe the priest teaches a few boys their letters. Choir boys, future monks, boys whose fingers are too clean to hold a spade. Girls? Don't even start. Historians still argue just how literate peasants truly were. Some claim up to 10% in some areas could sign their name. Others scoff. You don't need a percentage to know that books are expensive and candles are a luxury, and your hands are far more used to wool than vellum. But you're not stupid. Far from it. You know how to track the weather by the way smoke curls. You know how to count seed, trade sheep, and gauge a man's trustworthiness by how he holds a spoon. You memorize feast days, debts owed, songs sung, and which child belongs to which cousin, even if their ears all look the same. Your brain is sharp, just trained in survival, not scholarship. Still, sometimes you wonder, what's in those books? Not the Bible. You've heard the priest recite it 100 times, but the other ones, the ones chained to the abbey shelf, full of beasts with 7 heads, maps with dragons, recipes that probably don't start with "kill the goat." You heard once of a book with colored pictures, ink that looked like jewels. A man rode for 2 days just to see it, then turned back around, eyes wide, saying it was like looking inside God's dreams. You made a joke about how God's dreams probably involved better stew. No one laughed. You still think about that book. There's a boy in the next village who claims he can read. He walks around with a bit of wax tablet like it's gold, says his uncle trained with monks. You once asked him what your name looked like. He scratched it out, 5 squiggly lines and a fancy curl. You stared at it for a long time, then tucked it into your pocket like a secret. You can't read, but you do know symbols. A carved knot on a barn means the roof needs mending. A bundle of twigs by the door means a neighbor wants to trade. A feather in your stew, that's either a joke or a warning. Sometimes both. At night, you lie down and listen to the stories, not read, told. Your grandmother has a voice like dirt and honey. She knows stories that don't belong to time, ones with foxes who speak Latin, saints who turn into trees, and girls who sew rivers with golden thread. They're more real than any book, because they live inside you. You may not write your name, but you remember, you recite, you pass it down. One day your child will say, "Tell me about the fox again." And you will, not because it's written, but because you've never forgotten. You don't go to the doctor because there isn't one, not in the way you'd think. There's no clinic with a waiting room, no sterile tools laid on silver trays, no receptionist asking if the rash feels urgent. When you're sick, you have options, but none of them wear white coats. You start with the women. They know things. How to wrap a sprained ankle with boiled comfrey. How to make cough syrup from honey and thyme. How to pull a splinter without letting it fester. They learn it from their mothers, who learned it from theirs. It's not medicine, it's survival, passed hand to hand like a loaf of bread. Got a fever? They bring elderflower. Trouble sleeping? Poppy seed tea. Wounds? Yarrow and spiderwebs. Spiderwebs. You don't ask why it works, you just watch the bleeding stop and whisper thanks. Then there's the wise woman, not a doctor, not quite a witch, not someone you name too loudly if the priest is nearby, but everyone knows her name. She lives at the edge of the woods, where the birds don't sing as sweet and the moss always seems too green. She doesn't smile often. She stirs her concoctions with a hazel stick and spits in the pot when the mood strikes. You once saw her blow on a boil and mutter something in a language older than the road. The next day, the boil was gone. Historians still debate whether these women were respected healers or merely tolerated. You don't debate. You bring her a chicken and say please. For bigger things, broken bones, persistent fevers, childbirth, there's always prayer. The priest blesses water. He marks crosses in ash on foreheads. He reads from a book in Latin and asks for intercession. You don't know if it helps, but you always feel a little lighter afterward, even if just from crying. Occasionally, someone speaks of a physician, usually in stories. He lives in a city, wears robes, studies humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. He believes health is a balance of bodily juices, like a stew with the wrong ingredients. He prescribes leeches, or vinegar, or powdered unicorn horn if you're fancy. You've never met him. You have met the barber surgeon. Once. He passed through town with a satchel that smelled like death and onions. He pulled teeth in the square. reset a dislocated shoulder, and offered to let a man pee in a jar so he could divine the illness. The man declined. One boy who'd been coughing for weeks had a coin and a desperate mother. The barber gave him a syrup. It made him sleep. He never woke up. So you trust the women, you trust the herbs, you trust clean water, hot soup, and hope. In your world, injury is common. Burns from cooking, cuts from scythes, crushed toes from dropped stones. No one babbles about lawsuits. You wrap it, rest it, and keep moving. Unless it gets infected, then you visit the woman by the woods and bring another chicken. There's no antiseptic, no anesthesia. Pain is a companion, grumpy, constant, and weirdly motivating. You've seen a man pull out his own tooth with nothing but a knife, a scream, and a swig of beer. You applauded. When babies are born, the whole village leans in. The midwife leads. She hums, chants, presses, wipes sweat. Sometimes the baby cries. Sometimes the mother doesn't wake. It's part miracle, part gamble. When someone dies, there's no coroner. The priest says last rites. The neighbors dig. The body is laid out, shrouded, and lowered into the earth with hands that still ache from the harvest. No one asks for causes. They say, God called him, or her time had come. You might whisper it was bad air, bad water, bad luck, but in the end, it's all the same. A soul departed, a body returned to dirt. You're always aware of your body. How it aches after lifting, stiffens in winter, hums with hunger, throbs when a storm is coming. You know its moods. You notice its secrets. If it fails, no one will save you. So you listen. That scratch on your leg, keep it clean. That cough, don't ignore it. That odd ache in your chest, maybe it's just stew, or maybe it's not. But what can you do? You drink the tea, you eat the garlic. You pray. You rest. You live like someone who can't afford to break down. Because you are. You don't choose your job. You're born into it. Like a bucket tied to a rope. You only go where the well lets you. If your father grows barley, you grow barley. If your mother spins wool, you spin wool. If your uncle tends pigs and smells like fermented cabbage every day of his life, well, guess what's in your future? There's no resume, no interview, just calluses and repetition. You work because everyone else does. Because if you don't, the stew gets thinner and the chickens look at you sideways. Work isn't a category, it's the day, the air you breathe. The only reason your shoes are still holding together with that one miracle thread. From sunrise to sundown, your tasks blur. Till sow, water, weed, harvest, repeat. It's a rhythm you can hum in your sleep, and sometimes you do. On a good day, your hands smell like soil and onion. On a bad one, they smell like dung, sweat, and something you can't identify and are too tired to question. Work is divided, not neatly, but by necessity. You, as a man or boy, are expected to handle the field, the animals, the timber, and anything involving weights heavier than guilt. You learn early to swing an axe without chipping your foot, to balance a yoke of water without cursing too loudly, and to dig trenches with the existential despair of someone who knows it's going to rain anyway. If you're a woman, your work is constant and invisible. You bake, mend, gather, fetch, spin, feed, stir, soothe, scrub, and somehow still get blamed when the goat eats the laundry. The phrase division of labor sounds tidy. It's not. Everyone does everything, eventually. Children carry water, elders patch roofs. You once saw a 7-year-old chase a pig across the village square with a stick, and more swears than your grandfather. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants had more free time than modern workers. Depends how you define free. If free means not being in a factory 12 hours a day, maybe yes. But if free means having the energy to do something after work besides collapse, then probably not. Your breaks are rare. Seasonal festivals, Sundays. In theory, a sudden downpour that makes field work impossible, and stew tastes like regret. Even then, there's mending to do, roof leaks to patch, or a neighbor's ox to help dig out of a mud hole. You do the same tasks every year, but nothing feels routine. Every spring brings different frost. Every harvest offers new curses. You adapt, or starve, or both. There's no climbing the ladder, no promotions, no corner office with a view of the sheep. If you work well and don't anger the wrong people, maybe your family keeps your plot. Maybe your lord doesn't increase the rent. Maybe your ox doesn't die in its sleep. Maybe the blacksmith is respected, not wealthy but valuable. He makes the tools, repairs the plow, sharpens the blades that stand between you and starvation. He smells like fire and metal and old secrets. The miller, though, the miller is a whole thing. He grinds your grain for a share, always more than he should, always with a shrug, and that's the toll. You suspect he cheats. Everyone does, but his millstone is the only one nearby. And you're not about to carry 3 sacks of barley over 2 hills just for moral satisfaction. You've heard of guilds, groups of craftsmen in cities who wear fancy hats and argue about shoe-stitch techniques. You're not in a guild. You're in a hut holding your only pair of shoes together with twine and prayers. Your lord, he doesn't work. He hunts, he inspects, he taxes. Sometimes he smiles like a man who's never chopped wood in his life, which is accurate. When plague came, work changed, fields untended, markets silent, graves dug faster than furrows. You remember the silence, how even the wind seemed cautious. But you survived, you worked, you planted, you rebuilt. You always do. Because your work isn't just survival, it's identity, it's legacy. That barley you plant, you'll eat it in the form of bread so dense it could stun a crow. The cloak you mend, it will warm your child through another winter. And at the end of a long day, when the light turns gold and the world smells like baked earth, you sit, you exhale, you feel in your bones that yes, today you worked, and that work meant something. Even if your back disagrees, you don't fight wars, not unless you're told to, not unless someone with a sword and a scroll says you have to. And even then, you're not swinging a gleaming blade from horseback. You're probably carrying hay for the horses, or digging latrines, or being told you're lucky to serve the crown by dying in a muddy field far from home. Your job is to survive, not to conquer. Still, wars affect you. You hear about them first from the peddler, or from a priest's nervous sermon, or from the tax collector who arrives with a tighter jaw and a longer list. He doesn't take much time to explain the details, just that there's a new levy, and the king needs grain. And no, your cow isn't exempt from military duty. You try to joke, is the cow getting armor? The taxman doesn't laugh. When armies pass through, they don't tiptoe, they don't knock, they don't ask nicely. They take what they need, or what they want, or what looks like it might be useful. Your cart, your grain, your goats, your daughter if you're not careful. And when they leave mud and silence and a stew pot you won't touch again. Historians still argue how often peasants were forcibly conscripted. Some claim it was rare. Others point to entire villages emptied in the wake of royal campaigns. You don't care about the numbers. You just remember the sound of boots in the distance. If you do fight, it's not in armor. It's in stolen shoes and borrowed rage. You wield what you know, farm tools turned weapons, pitchforks raised like declarations. If the Lord says go, you go. Not because you believe, but because you owe him grain and blood. And today, it's blood's turn. The battlefield is chaos. You hear it before you see it, metal on metal, the low groan of a wounded man, the scream of someone who suddenly realizes they aren't a hero. You don't fight for glory. You fight for a promise. Your family won't starve if you make it back. You grip your tool tighter, hope it's enough, and try not to look anyone in the eye. And yet, sometimes war doesn't come to your doorstep with banners and bugles. Sometimes it arrives as rumors. The North is rising. The Queen is dead. The heir has vanished. Each whisper a tremor beneath your daily routine. You don't understand court politics, but you understand the way your lord clenches his jaw when reading letters. You know enough to plant the barley a little deeper in case you have to leave it behind. When rebellion brews, real rebellion from the ground up, you feel it in the air. The village feels heavier. The blacksmith hammers harder. The priest talks more about obedience. Someone carves a symbol into the well post, and no one speaks of it, but everyone notices. Sometimes people rise up. They shout. They gather. They demand. You don't join them, not because you're a coward, but because you've seen what happens to the loudest voice. Still, you remember the ones who tried. You say their names soft, like blessings or warnings. But war isn't always metal and marching. Sometimes it's famine, the kind brought by scorched fields, closed roads, broken trade. Suddenly bread is half the size and twice the price. Rats get bolder. Children cry with their mouths closed. Sometimes it's plague, and not the dramatic, mask-wearing, church bell tolling kind. The slow kind. The kind that starts with a cough and ends with fewer people at the table. And sometimes it's peace, but at a price. A new tax, a change in lordship, a banner with the same eagle, just upside down. You survive all of it because war is not your choice, but enduring it is your defiance. You keep planting, keep mending, keep singing lullabies that don't mention swords or fire. You tell stories to the children, safe ones where clever mice outwit cruel cats. No one dies in those, not out loud. And when someone says they're marching again, you don't panic. You gather your tools. You check the grain stores. You tell the goat to behave. And you get ready, not for glory, but for what comes next. You don't get a vacation, not the kind where you lounge by a sea you can't name, sipping something chilled out of a cup with a tiny umbrella. You get feast days, and even those aren't about resting so much as surviving differently. Your calendar is ruled by the church, not by planners or productivity apps. You don't mark time by birthdays or seasons, but by saints, fasts, and festivals. Today might be St. Dunstan's Day, tomorrow the Feast of the Assumption, and the day after that. Well, that's laundry again. Still, you look forward to feast days, because for once you don't have to toil in the field. Instead, you wake up just as early, but now to bake, boil, roast, sweep, chant, and maybe, if you're lucky, dance in a circle without throwing your back out. The holy days are strange magic. They arrive cloaked in incense and bells. The priest chants. The altar gleams. You wear your one clean tunic and hope no one notices the patch under your arm. The village gathers in the square, eyes full of something between reverence and hunger. Because a feast isn't just about piety, it's about food. There's more bread, maybe meat, something fried, something sticky, something passed around with wide eyes and wider bellies. Someone plays a pipe. Someone sings an off-key hymn. The children run in circles until someone yells, "Stop!" and they don't. For a moment, the village feels like a single, breathing creature. You laugh easier. You remember that life isn't just toil, that somewhere between the last frost and the next tax, joy grows too. Historians still debate how many feast days the average peasant had. Some claim 50 to 80 per year. Others argue many were too full of obligations to count as leisure. But you know this, on those days, the air shifts, the world softens, and you allow yourself to be. Still, joy doesn't mean freedom. Some feast days are solemn. You fast, you bow. You walk barefoot in the cold because your soul needs scrubbing. Lent, you know Lent, 40 days of penance, silence, and stews so thin they might as well be rumors. On special occasions like May Day or harvest, you get real celebration. The pole goes up, the ribbons flutter. Someone brings out the ale that's been hidden behind the pigsty. It tastes like freedom and mild regret. You've seen things on those nights, kisses behind trees, dances that start holy and end sweaty. A man dressed as a stag once, wearing antlers and not much else. He claimed it was ritual. You still don't quite believe him, but ritual matters, even if it's silly, even if it's invented last week by a shepherd with too much cider. Ritual is how you hold back the void. It's how you remind yourself, we are here, we are alive, we are more than work. And then, of course, there's Sunday, the day of rest. Technically, you still feed the animals, still fetch water, still repair the roof if it's leaking over your child's bed. But you pause, you breathe, you sit a little longer. You walk to church not with haste, but with the quiet slowness of someone who knows time is a luxury. The Mass is in Latin. You don't understand the words, but you know the rhythms. You kneel, stand, bow. You smell wax and hear old wood creak beneath old prayers. Sometimes you drift into thought, or into sleep, or into a memory you didn't ask for. But when the priest lifts the host, your eyes follow, because whether or not you understand, you believe. Even if you question, even if you worry, even if you've seen things that make belief hard, you still believe in harvests, in holy days, in hope. And when the service ends, and the sun is higher, and your stomach growls, you walk back through the village, past neighbors who smile more than usual, past children picking flowers, past a world that, for a few hours, doesn't feel like it's crushing you. Later that day, you'll go back to work. The stew will boil. The chickens will need scolding. But for now, you sit, just sit, because not working is, in itself, an act of resistance. And in this life, your life, that's the closest thing to a vacation you'll ever know. You don't expect to be remembered. There won't be songs about you. No scrolls will carry your name. No statue will rise in the square with your likeness. Eyes cast nobly toward a sky you've never seen without clouds. You are a peasant, a farmer, a laborer. You are the background of history, the breath between battles, the calloused hand behind every shining night, the silent endurance that props up castles you'll never step foot in. But still, you live, you wake, you work, you laugh, You ache. You fall in love. You raise children. You bury friends. You kneel in church pews. And sometimes in fields when the light is just right, you whisper a prayer that has no words, only longing. You've learned not to ask, "Why me?" and instead ask, "What now?" There is no grand destiny, no prophecy, only next season's planting, and whether the rain will come when it should, only how long the roof will hold, and whether your child's cough will pass by Sunday. Only small decisions that shape large consequences, like when to pull the oats or when to trade that goat for a second pair of boots. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants felt hope, as if hope needs a reason to exist, as if the act of getting up again every day is not the most radical kind of hope there is. Your stories are not written, they're woven into blankets passed down through generations, into songs half remembered by your grandchildren, into the shape of the land itself. Furrows you carved, trees you planted, stones you stacked so the next one wouldn't have to. You'll die like you lived, without ceremony. Your name etched softly into wood. Your friends whispering a psalm. Your family spreading manure over the spring field the next day because the barley won't plant itself. But that doesn't mean you didn't matter. You mattered entirely. Because this world, the lords, the knights, the kings with their gold-threaded banners, only exist because you fed them. Because you built the roads they rode on, grew the wheat in their bread, raised the sheep in their cloaks. You made the kingdom real, and no one thanks you, but I will, because in every line of history, behind every pompous name and glittering title, there is a quiet shadow. That shadow is you, and without it, without you, none of it could have happened. So rest. You've done enough.